more than that, um, what I want to talk about is just what are our standards. See, I grew up in a neighborhood where, or I'll say neighborhoods, where if you look out your door, you could see the result of low expectations everywhere. You could see what was happening um, because people had a low standard of how they expected themselves to carry on and how and what outcomes that they expected. And so that's me growing up seeing what low expectations does to an environment. Because if you have low expectations, then you're not hard on yourself when you don't achieve, and achievement matters, right? Because you like, so for example, society will put low expectations on you to say, well, if you come from a certain place and you've had certain experiences, then you know you shouldn't be held to the same standard as other people. It's actually okay for you not to accomplish anything because of where you come from. Um, and so what happens though is that typically people that come from poor areas, and they'll usually do this with, black people, Mexican people. They will, I mean, we see it all the time, right? Like they lower the standard because there's a belief that you can't accomplish the same thing. There's some, national merit scholarships that says, okay, if you qualify for it, if you're in the top 1%, but if you're, if you're black, or a term I never use, like minority, right? I'm not, ain't nothing minor about me. I never use that phrase. But if they put you in one of these categories, then they say, well, if you're in the top 3%, lowering the standard for you. I think there's an attempt to say there's been some hardships and injustices that have happened to specific groups of people, so we need to make some concessions to give them time to catch up. In a way, I get it. I understand the attempt, but I think in execution, basically what it's saying is we don't think you're smart enough, we don't think you're capable enough, so we want to make a concession, with you, so that you can, this is what it looks like to be equal because something inherently is inferior about you, and I think that's just nonsense. But forget externally what people, what expectations people set for you or what standards people have for you, because that doesn't matter so much. It's not the people outside of you whose expectations and standards have the greatest impact. What are your own personal standards, right? So are you pursuing excellence in everything that you do, or are you giving yourself out? Are you pursuing excellence in everything that you do, or have you given yourself a way out and made it okay for you to just fall short in certain areas, right? Because one of the things that I believe is that if we raise the standard, then we raise the family. And if you raise the family, you raise the community. If you raise the community, you change the culture of the people group that you're around. But it starts with raising the standard for within the family. So through one of my organizations, a nonprofit, we work with a ton of young people, and my thing is I don't like talking about problems. I just want to get my hands dirty. I'm gonna get in the streets, and I'm going to try to be a solution towards some of these problems. But what often happens, we'll go into schools, and what you will see is the results of these low expectations and low standards. So teachers are struggling trying to get, DeAndre to read. Instead of DeAndre dealing with the reading problem, DeAndre cusses out the teacher. And then the teacher calls the parent, and then the parent makes an excuse for the child because the parent's embarrassed at this also. So one example, I remember my wife, she was doing some student teaching at a middle school, and I don't know what book they were reading or whatever it is. And if you, my wife is she's a sweetheart. She's an amazing woman. She's just laid back. She's chill. She's nice to everybody, and she really deeply has a compassion for just people, all people, right? And so they're going around a circle and having the kids read, and she gets to this kid. I don't know his name, and it's not important, right? Because I'm not trying to embarrass the kid because it's just a story. But she gets to him, and he's like, "Bitch, I told you I don't want to read." He cusses her out, right? And my wife, I think at the time, she was probably a lot more innocent than when she met me because But at the time, she was a lot nicer, And so she was just shocked that somebody would actually talk to her like this, right? Especially a young person who she's just like, I just asked them to read. I don't understand what happened. And so the parents come in and sit down with the principal and them, and the mom does exactly what I just told you. She says, well, I mean, he told you he didn't want to read, right? Now, this kid is screwed. Unless something has changed or somebody's intervened somewhere, I'm curious to know what's happened with this specific kid, but I can tell you tons of these stories where you have parents who lower the standard, who say it's okay for you, like the expectation is for you to excel and to be elite as an athlete, right? To be the best basketball, football player, the fastest kid. And so there's a standard of excellence when it comes to that sport. And I think that's a good thing. But that standard is not matched when it comes to the other important, either equally or more important, just depending on what matters to you, areas of your life. So for example, it's not okay for you to be a great athlete but a horrible student, right? Not to say now some people actually have learning disabilities. They have there are things within their brain that they cannot control that prevent them from being able to learn or retain information. That is some people's story. Regardless of the color of their skin, we know that's the fact. Now, in those cases, we should be getting people help. There are plenty of resources, especially if you're in America, there are resources at just about every school that can help you if you have a learning disability. Often what happens though is that people will be too embarrassed to actually get the help that they need. Nobody wants to admit that they have a learning disability. So instead of saying, hey, I actually have a disability, I need help, let me get into the special education program, people will much rather pretend like everything's okay to avoid the stigma of being labeled as special ed, or the kids call SPED, right? But here's the thing, you pretending you don't have a problem doesn't mean you don't have a problem, and it doesn't make the problem go away. All it does is prevent you from actually getting the help by identifying the problem and solving it, taking advantage of the resources. And so, but let your jump shot be off. Let you be in a situation to where you need extra training, and parents are breaking their back to do these things. Now, here's the thing. I'm not attacking any specific group, right? I'm just telling you, one, from my own experiences, this is what I see. And then for me, who's somebody who's deeply concerned about family and communities, right? Especially families and communities of poor people, right? Not just poor people that are black or brown, but poor people in general. We see these things happening, right? And I'm somebody who's grown up extremely poor, and I don't want that cycle repeated for my children. So I'm not speaking as an outsider. This is my lived experience, right? I know what low standards did to me, and it wasn't until somebody called me out and said, look, it's not okay. Your situation doesn't define you. Do something about your life. You can, it's just a matter of all you're going to do is stop making excuses. And I've had plenty of mentors, I've had coaches that all called me out and held me to a higher standard, even when I wanted to live here. My mother, we grew up at the height of the crack era. We grew up in areas where it was violent and gangs were taking off in San Antonio. And it was extremely violent. People were getting killed daily. These things were going on. But my mother, no matter what was going on, how poor we are, no matter how many days we went without food, she never allowed the environment that we grew up in to dictate what our standard was. She said, reading is important. So we began reading early. Education is important, right? All of these things there. So even when I acted in a way that was contrary, I knew what the standard was. It wasn't because the standard was lowered for me. It's just because I wanted to rebel against it. So I say this, we need to raise the standards to raise the family, right? And if we raise the families, then we raise the communities. What we have to do is take inventory and say, hey, am I giving myself a pass? Is my child doing something wrong, and I'm not addressing it because I don't want to deal with the confrontation or the conflict? Am I a dad who has been absent from my child's life and making an excuse? My baby mama be tripping, or I can't stand that, the kid's mom, whatever it is, right? Are you somebody who's making an excuse for that situation? Have you said, well, you know what, I'm not taking care of my child or loving my son or whatever it is because some other, you're lowering the standard, and then you have other people who are making an excuse and saying, well, it's not their fault. It's not their fault, right? We have to assume 100% responsibility for the things that we've been given the privilege to steward over by God. Our families, our children, our jobs, the environment, the community and place that we live in. We all have a responsibility to do our part to uplift those things and to cultivate those things and make them better than where they started. Like, we have a responsibility to do so. But lower standards lower the culture. And if we continue to just lower the standards, then what that means is that we will keep seeing struggle with reading and writing. We will say, well, that's just not for. And I have people saying this all the time, that somehow that whether it's it's the school system is set up for black kids to fail because black kids can't sit, like nonsense like that. Like, kids can sit still and can learn, right? We have to just make that important. And it starts at home, right? It starts with saying, you know what, I struggle with math or I struggle with reading or whatever it is, but my kids won't. So I'm gonna make sure that I am introducing them to these things at a young age. Sometimes it means we got to turn the TV off and we have to make it a priority to be getting these things done, right? We have to help our kids, our sons, our daughters understand that it's not okay to just pass, that there's an expectation for you to be excellent. Sometimes you'll fall short of that expectation, but it doesn't change the expectation. The standard is the standard. And that's one of the things, like with my sons, and I have a 16-year-old and I have younger sons that are 6, 4, and almost 2. And my goal with them is just to understand, like, listen, you were created for a purpose, right? You were made by God to be great. And I've tried to reinforce this since they were little kids. And get them to understand that the standard is the standard. The expectation does not change just because your feelings change. The expectation is not lowered just because you don't feel like it. Nobody cares. Nobody cares how you feel. The standard is the standard. So we have to keep the standard high. And even, listen, the problem that we often have in society is not that people have set too high standards and fell short of them. That's not the problem. The problem is often that people have set their standards too low and actually achieved it, right? Have set the standards too low and actually achieved it. We got to raise those standards and we got to set higher expectations for what we expect for ourselves, what we expect for our children, what we expect for our families, and then how we plan to be involved in the communities. Because what happens is this, because you have a lower standard, we accept nonsense. And so, I'm not trying to offend anybody, and I'm not trying to say, well, hey, I'm better than you, so do it my way. What I'm saying is that we have thousands of years of history where we can look at cultures, we can look at European cultures, we can look at African cultures, we can look at Asian cultures, we can look at communities north, south, east, and west, and we can say, hey, lower standards have led to bad things. And we have plenty of examples of those things. And so what I'm saying is this: if we will raise our standards, we can raise the family. So we should start there. It starts with raising your own personal standards, raising the standards that you have within your own family. And then the standards in the community change as a result of that. And as you start to introduce a higher standard, the culture of whatever that community group will change. And it's across the board. We accept this notion that it's okay for grown men to not take responsibility, right? We call 18, 19, 20, 21, 25-year-old men, oh, he's just a kid. No. You don't get to just be a boy forever. Adolescence is some bullshit. Adolescence is some straight BS, right? Like, you don't get to figure it out and play around until you're 30. Like, that's not a magic age where all of a sudden, oh, now I get it, I've grown up. That's not how it works. Like, we got to take responsibility now, right? Like, young men, man up. Young women, woman up. Raise the standard for what you expect for yourself, what you expect for your community, and what you will tolerate for yourself. And so I believe that if we have strong men, we will have better communities. I believe that if we have men willing to lead and sacrificing for their families, our families will be stronger. I believe that if we have men who are being altruistic, putting the needs of others before themselves and leading, being willing to stand up for what's right, no matter what culture says. Being able to determine that regardless of what's going on, here's how I'm operating. If we do that, I think our society will be better and our world will be better. So thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you for taking the time to watch, because I'm going to drop this one on YouTube so you can get the link down so you can follow the Art of Hope show there. My name is Chadwick Sapenter. I don't have the answers. I'm not claiming to have all the answers. I'm just on here keeping a promise to myself that I was going to do one podcast a week for 2019. That's 52 podcasts, so I'm doing it. You don't have to like what I say. You don't even have to like how I say it. I don't even care. This ain't about you. This is about me keeping a promise to myself. And in the process, if I can help other people, I want to do so. So tune in next time. Thank you guys. Tell me, where do you see low standards having a negative impact? Where can we, what can we be doing better? What does it mean to raise standards for yourself and for your own family? Where have you been making excuses and lowering the standard? I want to know. I want to hear all about it. Thank you guys for tuning in. Looking forward to next time. Have a great day.